The coalition programme for government announced today looks like an election manifesto. But who voted for it? Welcome to Question Time. With me here in Richmond Park, the new Conservative Home Secretary, Theresa May, Nick Clegg's predecessor as leader of the Liberal Democrats, Campbell, the Europe Minister in Gordon Brown's government, Caroline Flint, the Director of Liberty, Shami Chakrabarti, and the author, Douglas Murray. Well, welcome to Richmond Park, which was, of course, the constituency taken by Zac Goldsmith for the Conservatives after a really ferocious battle with the Liberal Democrats, and two parties which are at war during the election and are now in a happy coalition. Tonight we're going to try and find out what the voters make of the so-called new politics. Our first question from Fiona Sumner, please. Fiona Sumner.
Good evening. Was Nick Clegg right to defend the decision under the Human Rights Act to allow two Pakistani terror suspects to remain in Britain despite an assessment that they pose a serious threat to the public?
Douglas Murray.
No, he wasn't right. The facts of this case are complex at the moment because of the complex nature of the legal entanglement into which this country has got itself. I would just put it this way. The Commission decided these two men were actively involved with Al-Qaeda. The security services cannot, they say, deliver this evidence in open court. It was delivered in closed session there. And so we're in a bind. And I just put it as follows. We're in a bind because we apparently cannot extradite these two young men, Pakistani nationals, who are wanting to harm, we're told, wanting to harm people in this country. We're not able to extradite them to Pakistan, their own country, in case they are tortured there. I would just put it this way. We are now going to have to pay for two Al-Qaeda associates to stay in this country to protect their human rights, defending their rights, I believe, over the rights of the people of this country. I think you have to look at this perfectly plainly, and I would say you can't put it any stronger than this. Any society that wanted to survive would not behave like this, would not defend their enemies over their own people, would not protect their enemies better than they protect their own people.
But it would send them away regardless.
Would send them away regardless
of what happened.
If the new Home Secretary has any sense about this, and I very much hope she has, she'll realise that no government that wants to survive would behave like this.
All right.
It is preposterous to do that.
Well, Theresa May, Nick Clegg said the law's very clear. It's wrong to deport people where they could be seriously mistreated or tortured or indeed killed. And this government will continue to operate on these standards. Your Home Secretary, do you think he was right to say that?
Well, that was the decision that was taken by SIAC, the body that looked into this particular case of these two individuals. Government had applied for them to be deported. The result of that came out of the case and the hearing was that, yes, they were a threat to national security. That has already been referred to, but that, no, they could not be deported to Pakistan because of the treatment that they would receive there. Obviously, from the government's point of view, what we now do is take all measures possible to ensure that these individuals cannot engage in terrorist activity and that we ensure the safety of the public. That's the first. But you
wanted them to be deported because that was why they were having the case in the first place. And you said you were disappointed in the verdict.
I was disappointed in the verdict. I think technically the application obviously had been made, the case had been brought up before the election, so under the previous government. But yes, there is an issue here, but I think we mustn't see this as a question of national security versus civil liberties, which is how this argument is sometimes presented. Actually, national security, maintaining national security, enables us to enjoy our civil liberties. And what we as a coalition government will be looking at is ensuring that, yes, we can do both of those things, that we can maintain national security, but that also we recognise the importance of civil liberties and the importance of maintaining people's freedoms. Now, there is something that we can be doing, and we will be doing as a government in relation to cases like this, which is to be pursuing further discussions with governments like the government of Pakistan, to be looking for the sorts of guarantees that would not be judged by the government, but would be judged by this body, effectively by a court, to enable people to be.
Can I draw you back to what Fiona Sumner asked, which is, was Nick Clegg, Deputy Prime Minister, right to defend the decision that was made to allow the terror suspects to stay here, or not?
Nick Clegg was right to say that as a country we want to ensure that we maintain civil liberties and people's freedoms. What we want to do is to be able, though, obviously, to maintain national security. But as I say, these are not opposite parts of an argument. National security is what enables us to defend civil liberties. And in the programme that we have outlined today, that we've set out today, the programme for the coalition government over the next 5 years, we're absolutely clear that there are many ways in which we want to enhance people's civil liberties, in which the Labour government was taking people's freedoms away, in which the state was becoming too much of an interfering body in people's lives. And we do need to roll back certain aspects of the state in this country, and like scrapping ID cards, in order to maintain
Well, let's not go there. Let's just stick with this case. Hold on a moment, Douglas Murray. Ming Campbell, Theresa May said she was disappointed with the court ruling. Were you disappointed with it?
I was disappointed that the position of the government was not able to be upheld. But, of course, what Nick Clegg was doing was he was, if you like, celebrating the integrity of the process. And that is a very important point. Because
when you say that the government, you thought they should have been expelled, you thought the government was right to seek their expulsion?
There were, of course, was quite entitled to seek their expulsion.
And right to do so.
Why? Because there was colourable evidence that they were a threat to security. But the point I want to make is this. Human rights are not something you select on a Tuesday and ignore on a Wednesday. Human rights are indivisible. And if we once start to get into the business of choosing the circumstances in which we apply human rights, then we open the door to authoritarianism and to people being discriminated against. And to people being discriminated against by reason of their colour, their ethnic background,
their membership of a terrorist group.
Perhaps even their sexual orientation. Now, I wish Pakistan was a country where we could safely send people like this, but it isn't. And as Nick Clegg quite rightly pointed out, it's not just a question of inhumane behaviour or torture, it's the possibility of death. This is a country which has consistently rejected the death penalty. Since I've been in the House of Commons in the last 23 years, every time it's come up, the House of Commons has rejected the death penalty. It is wholly inconsistent with that moral stance to say that we won't impose the death penalty, but we will send people who come through our judicial process to a country where we know it's likely to be imposed.
But then I don't understand why you supported the application to have them deported in the first place, if you say that. And why you agree with Theresa May that it was disappointing that the court ruled they couldn't be deported? You think the exact opposite.
Because we have a process. And what happened here was that these arguments were put before the court, and the court decided.
But if you'd been in the court, sorry, you would have said these people mustn't be deported. You'd have defended them.
I would have balanced, as any judge must, the competing priorities of the fact that these men are alleged to be harmful to national security, with the equally powerful competing priority that if they were sent home, they were liable to be killed.
All right.
Now, that is the job of the judge, it's the job of the process. And if we start interfering in it, whether Home Secretary or Member of Parliament, then we will seriously damage the integrity of that process, and we will inevitably lead to circumstances in which human rights are applied selectively and not universally. It's called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Why? Because of its universality.
Thank you. Let's hear from some members of our audience. Yes, ma'am.
I think the judgment was clear that they were Al-Qaeda affiliated, and you can't talk about human rights in the absence of human responsibilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you like to have seen happen?
Well, I think there should be some consideration for deportation to a country where they can be safely looked after, or perhaps even back to some Al-Qaeda base. I mean, there's going to be huge... there's going to be... Hang on, I haven't finished.
No?
There is huge public expense going to be tied up looking after these two people in a time when most ordinary people are having to bear real constraints, particularly in the public sector.
OK. You sit in the second row from the back, and then I come to you. Yes.
If they are a danger to the UK, they are also a danger to Pakistan. So surely they should be locked up and not deported.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Shami?
The Deputy Prime Minister is quite right. We don't do torture, we don't send people to torture. That principle, by the way, is supposed to be a principle that binds all democratic people together and actually does bind the three political parties round this table together. It was Winston Churchill who spread that principle across post-war Europe. He had the distinction not just of standing up to Hitler, but of being in his time both a Liberal MP and a Conservative one.
Okay, but get to the point. What do you do in this case?
And it was Caroline's party that gave us the Human Rights Act.
What's your view in this case?
Not only does Pakistan torture people, and that's why I share the Home Secretary's disappointment that they do that, it also is a place from which people who are dangerous terror suspects walk out of police stations and plot terrorist atrocities against other countries from Pakistan. So it is not safe in terms of human rights and it is not safe in terms of security. Until Pakistan ups its game, we're going to have to work harder to go back to old-fashioned charges, evidence and proof, and dangerous people can sit behind bars, yes, at public expense, but behind bars in Britain.
Yes.
But they can't.
Yeah, they can.
Well, we're told that they can't. The government says they can't. If we
Can
can't
I help you with that?
Well, I don't know. I don't know.
Can
Let
I
me
try?
know.
By the way, it's not an extradition case, Douglas. It's a deportation case. I think that a lot of the material in this particular case and many others comes from intercepted telephone calls and emails. And if that stuff can be seen in the Special Immigration Commission, it's time that we updated the law so that material can be put before 12 jurors at the Old Bailey so we can prosecute people.
Well, I think this case raises a number of dilemmas, and I have to say I think it raises a huge dilemma for the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition, because the Liberal Democrats support the Human Rights Act, the Tories wanted to get rid of it. Both parties, I have to say, have opposed control orders, which are likely to be the outcome of the case today. Now, would I like to be able to deport people, not just for terrorist activities, for criminal activities, back to their country of origin? Yes, I would. But we are committed to the Human Rights Act, and for the reason Shami outlined, we have to take that seriously. But then we have a situation where we have information, some of it through intercept evidence, as Shami pointed out, which does indicate, and clearly the court recognises, that these people are dangerous. They're a danger to our security. But actually it is more difficult to then put that evidence in front of a court. When I was a Home Office Minister back in 2003, and I was dealing with issues around organised crime, I can assure you that if we could put that evidence into court without undermining the security of our intelligence services, I would be the first to do that. Now, we have had
Can you just explain? Sorry, can you explain why it is?
We have had a recent review led by Sir John Chilcot, which has said that evidence should be admissible as long as it doesn't affect operational proceedings. That's where we have to go. Absolutely. But I hope we'd all agree that it is very, very difficult. And in the meantime, Shami, we're going to have these control orders, and I hope the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, now that they are in government and having to deal with national security, will recognise that when they were shouting at us about these things, that this is a decision that they're going to have to face up to.
Theresa May, you're going to face up to that in the way that it's put?
Our position, and the position that actually we've come to in the coalition agreement, is in fact the position that we had before the election, which is that we believe there should be a review of control orders. We also believe we also want to look at the introduction of intercept evidence and at ways in which that can become permissible, commensurate with not obviously revealing details.
But we did the review on that, didn't we, Theresa? Yes. So you only have to do is follow it up from what the Labour government started.
Hopefully. But may I come back on that? This isn't a party political issue. This is people's lives and their liberties.
Can I just make a point, though, about intercept evidence? Because I think we need to be absolutely clear that intercept evidence isn't the sort of silver bullet that is going to suddenly send all these difficult decisions away. It isn't the case that all cases will suddenly be able to be dealt with if intercept evidence is admissible. And I think we should. These are very difficult.
Could I answer on control orders?
Hold on a second. I want to go to the man there.
Could I just ask the panel, if we are worried about these two individuals, would it be fair to say then we should be worried about the 900,000 illegals that Theresa May apparently is now going to legalise on behalf of the Liberal Party?
I think you were not going to.
Well, first of all, she is.
Misunderstanding of the...
They dropped that. They dropped it, didn't they?
The amnesty on illegal immigrants has been dropped.
Given the scale of
illegal
2
immigrants
people...
are not terrorists, forgive me.
I'll come to you. Douglas Murray, I just want to bring you back to the point, which the other panellists all seem to disagree with you on, that the fact of what might happen to them if they return to Pakistan doesn't worry you, or wouldn't inhibit you from sending them there.
No, of course it worries me. Of course I'm not in favour of torture. Nobody's in favour of torture. However, we have to decide whose rights should trump other people's. Do the rights of the British people trump the rights of al-Qaeda terrorists who come to this country and then claim rights they wouldn't afford to you and me? I'm not sure they do. We have a problem in this country, firstly, because, as Shami quite rightly says, Pakistan is an unstable state. Its prison system is unstable. We'd have to have assurances they could be kept in prison. Rashid Rauf walked out of prison.
Absolutely.
Other people have been kept in prison there. However, we have the following situation. Not only can we not deport to Pakistan, we can't deport a famous al-Qaeda cleric who's still in this country to Jordan. We can't deport people. It took years to deport somebody to France in the 1990s. This is absurd. We have to make a decision about whether or not this country really wants to be the retirement home for all would-be jihadis.
Okay. Man up there. Yes, you, sir.
I think if we don't protect the human rights of even our enemies, then we become a little bit more like them.
Yeah, all right. Just briefly, Ming, and then...
Part of the problem is the fact that intercept evidence, it's not just people who happen to pick up a telephone and hear a telephone conversation. It's the product of some very, very sophisticated operational activity by the security services. And one of the anxieties is that if you use this evidence, then you have to source it. And those defending people who were charged on the basis of intercept evidence would have the right to explore that in cross-examination, perhaps in public.
So you mean that the defence barrister would be entitled to know where the information was got, how it was got and all that, yes?
I think you can find safeguards to deal with that problem.
So do I.
And Sir John Chilcot appeared to think that these issues could be resolved. And that's why, as I've already said in this programme, for government, intercept evidence is something which is going to be explored.
I agree this is all difficult, but on control orders, could I just say, in honesty, that I have personally been accosted by someone on a control order wearing a plastic tag at large public gatherings that included ministers and former ministers. Being on a plastic tag in your living room is not where someone who's supposedly dangerous should be. We have to go back to basics. There won't be a risk-free society. Hang on, we can manage risk, but ultimately we need to go back to charges, evidence, proof, and if you're guilty, prison.
Of course that's the case, Shami. We all want that. But
control orders do not make people safe.
Shami, of course we'd like these people locked up if they've committed these terrible crimes. But the fact is, life isn't as simple as that. And Lord Carlisle, a Lib Dem peer, who's overseen this area for a number of years, recognises that in difficult circumstances, control orders are the best we've got.
That's
if we can find another way around it,
all right, thank you both. We're going to move on to another question.
Just defending old
We're going to move on to another question, and if you wouldn't say to each other, hold on all the time, we might get through the material quicker. Narendra Ramnani, please.
Clegg and Cameron seem happier with each other than either do with their own parties. Does the panel think that they have betrayed their core supporters?
Clegg and Cameron happier with each other than they do seem with their own parties. Have they betrayed their core supporters? Caroline Flint, as an objective observer.
Well, they did appear very together in the garden at number 10 the other week, and I have to say, I mean, maybe, they share so much in common in terms of their backgrounds that maybe that's part of the ease in which they work together. I think both of them will have challenges in their own parties about decisions that are being made and compromises. Clearly, in this coalition document, there are some things that have been dropped on both sides. There are other matters that appear to be finding some sort of way of compromise or fudge, people might say, in other areas. There are also other matters about their parliamentary parties and how they will respond. So, to be honest, they're having seemingly coming across together on the TV at the moment, but actually what will be the proof of it will be how it operates in Parliament over the weeks and months and possibly years ahead. And when it comes to the legislation and decision-making, whether or not this coalition can hold together.
Who do you think's given up most in getting this marriage going?
Well, I think actually in many respects they both are giving up a lot. From the mood music that I'm hearing from their backbenchers in the House of Commons, I think both sides, in terms of their parliamentary family, feel aggrieved at how much the other is giving up. But I have to say at the moment, until Parliament gets up and running, as of the Queen's speech next week, we'll really begin to see whether this coalition can hang together.
Ming Campbell, you might have been leader of the Liberal Democrats at this election, and Nick Clegg happened to be. You were the one before. Would you have done this deal?
I don't think I would have had the kind of impact that Nick Clegg had in the debates, which changed the whole terms of trade of the general election in a quite extraordinary way, wholly unpredicted by anyone that he should make such an impact. And he talked about the new politics. And for all my immodesty about my own strengths, I'm not sure I'm a representative of the new politics much. And I don't accept...
So you don't really go along with the new politics, you mean? You're not really happy with the new politics?
Look, Nick Clegg was the leader for 2010, and he's proved that by taking the Liberals, or Liberal Democrats, into government for the first time for a very, very long time. Now, what were the alternatives? The alternatives were to say, no, we won't have any arrangement with the Conservatives. They can form a minority government. We would have had a second election within 6 months, because the Palace would have undoubtedly granted a dissolution if David Cameron had gone to the Queen and said, I cannot govern, I need a fresh mandate. The other alternative was something called confidence and supply, in which you don't vote them down on a motion of confidence, but you let them have their budget, thereby allowing them to carry through their programme, with which I have had quite fundamental disagreements. Again, there would have been a fresh election in 6 months. What were the public crying out for all the way through the general election? Stability. And therefore, if you were interested in stability, there had to be an arrangement between the Liberal Democrats and one of the other parties. And I can tell you from my own personal experience that the Labour Party, for a variety of reasons, some entirely legitimate, some as a result of the shock of losing office after 13 years, simply weren't up for it. And therefore the choice was, is it a full-blown coalition with the Conservatives or nothing? And the decision, in the national interest, was that it should be a full-blown coalition. And part of that, if you like, is represented in the contents of this document, one, of course, of which I suspect may be of great interest to the people of this constituency, and that is the fact that there's to be no third runway at Heathrow.
Yes, well, that's a pretty cheap shot to end with, but so unlike Charles Kennedy, you go for this, and had you been leader, you would have gone for it. You're 100% behind it.
I voted for it. I had reservations. Why? Because throughout my political life, the argument in our party has been that the realignment would come from the left. That's why people like Roy Jenkins and David Owen left the Labour Party and formed the SDP. It's what Joe Grimond talked about, what David Steele, Paddy Ashdown with Tony Blair. It was all about realignment from the left. Right. That was not feasible. It wasn't possible. The national interest pointed in another direction.
The national interest. The man in the second row there, you say.
Can Caroline confirm that if Labour had been given the opportunity to form a coalition with the Lib Dems, they would have made no concessions whatsoever?
Well, first of all, I didn't believe in us making a coalition with the Lib Dems. I think we lost the election, and I think we had to accept that, to be honest. And I really didn't like this sort of grubby speed dating that was going on the other week. So that's my view on it. I mean, looking through the coalition document, as I said, you can see some things that have been dropped, some things that have been kept in, but there's a lot of stuff that's been pushed out to commissions. So I think it's, you know, as I say, there may be policies that come forward that actually, you know, I'm not going to say at this stage that I won't support, because I think that would be ridiculously immature. But the fact is, I don't think this coalition is all new and shiny as people think. I think it's about power, and the Liberal Democrats wanted power and they grabbed it.
All right. Douglas Murray, the question is, do you think that the two parties have betrayed their core supporters and are happier with each other than with those parties?
Well, they're obviously very happy with each other. Their appearances so far have suggested that, and I think that voters for both parties are going to feel very let down by this. This is not what they voted for. And let me just give you an example. Let me give you one quick example. This programme, it's nice to have two representatives of the governing coalition on this week. But what happens in the future on a programme like this? Will those voters who voted Conservative at this election be happy when their representative is Simon Hughes of the Lib Dems, for instance? Or will the Liberal Democrats be happy when their man up on the panel is Michael Howard? I'm not sure they will be. I'm not sure that anyone's very happy about this. Now, admittedly, this is the best of a bad job. But, and I think, like most of the country, we wish this coalition well. But the number of compromises that are going to be happening along the way, the number of things that have already been, as Caroline says, shunted off to commissions, almost every single major issue has been shunted off into a commission.
Hang on a second. Ming Campbell said this was done in the national... We'll come to that. Ming Campbell said this was in the national interest. Are you saying you endorse it, you wish it well because it is in the national interest, or do you think it's not in the national interest?
Well, look, I mean, I wish it well because they're a government who've just come in and I hope they do a good job of it, like anyone else does. But there are a lot of people in this country... there are a lot of people in this country, like myself, who believe now that they're effectively not represented. Most Conservative voters in this country are not represented. Most Conservative voters in this country don't feel they have any, as far as I can see, profit from the Clegg alliance. And now, the worst thing about this, if I may say so, is the following, is that the political parties spend the whole election talking about minute differences between themselves, actually sort of technical differences, but they make them huge. And then they come into government like this and they say, actually, this was what we wanted all along. We forgot. This was actually the ideal. Well, in which case, why didn't you admit during the campaign there wasn't much that you were arguing about?
Theresa May.
I'm afraid what Douglas has just said is a gross misrepresentation of the situation that we have with the coalition government. Let's just go back to that election result. Caroline's right. Labour lost the election. People quite like the look of the Conservatives, but they didn't actually want to give us that outright majority. And I think what we have done, the Liberal Democrat and Conservative parties, in putting together this coalition, is actually we've listened to the people of this country. We've listened to the message that the voters gave us, and we've put together what we believe, and what I firmly believe, will provide stable and strong government for this country. And with a fixed-term parliament, I think we have entered a new era of politics in this country. And yes, it is difficult for some people to adjust to it, and yes, some compromises do have to be made. But I think we're actually at an exciting time in British politics where we're taking a whole different approach to how we govern this country, and we're saying what matters, what we think people want, is stable government for 5 years. And what you have in this programme, yes, there are some compromises, of course there are, when two parties are working together.
Look at the compromises in the Labour government in the course of the last 13 years. Gordon Brown and Tony Blair at each other's throats for most of those 13 years.
Honestly, there's a complete difference between two parties with completely different manifestos coming together and cobbling together in a matter of a week.
Well, and two people fighting like ferrets in a sack for 13 years.
No, actually, on the policy issues, actually, that was come to agreement in a democratic way within our party, actually. This is the difference. We've had, manifestos put out there in the general election, and what's the document today, whilst does reflect those manifestos in different ways, in other ways it doesn't at all.
Theresa May, what about what the right-wing press, the Mail, the Sun, you appear to have lost their support over this Human Rights Act? You came in saying you were going to abolish it and choose a British Human Rights Act, and now you say you're not going to because of the... Isn't that an example of something where you radically changed the position that people that supported you wanted to see carried out?
We said during the general election that we would introduce a British Bill of Rights. In this document, you do have, I admit, it's one of the commissions that is in this document, one of the few commissions in this document, but what we say is we will set up a commission to look at establishing a British Bill of Rights. And we then go on within this document to point out that we do want to ensure that we're maintaining and standing by our human rights requirements, but also that we need to ensure that we do have the responsibilities. Somebody said earlier, in relation to the first question, about with rights come responsibilities. That's absolutely correct.
But with coalitions come commissions.
Well, David, through this document, what you will see is page after page of agreement on decisions that we have taken that have been... I mean, many people, across in Europe, in mainland Europe, where they're used to coalition governments, it often takes weeks, maybe months, to actually bring those together. A lot of work has gone into this, and what you see in here is Narinda's original question was about, have the core supporters been sold out? No, they have not. The three words that underpin this document are freedom, fairness and responsibility. And freedom, fairness and responsibility have always underpinned what the Conservative Party believes in.
The man up there, yes. No, the man in the centre there, you, yes, that's right.
Does Douglas, therefore, agree with PR if he feels loads of people are not represented in this country? I have a feeling you don't.
No, I do. I happen to think that a very great number of people in this country now are utterly disenfranchised from politics, and that these three parties argue over really very small amounts of ground. That you can vote, you could pretty much vote for any three of them, and as you can see, any of the three can make a pact with any of the others. There's not actually very much difference between them. I would love to see the British political system, the British public, involved in politics again. Genuinely interested in it, and not in this way of saying, as all three parties do, you know, we are for individuals and freedom. And anyone can say that. Anyone can say it. Everybody is for that. But please, let's see some proper, interesting difference among our politicians.
Man in the front here in blue.
Hello.
Don't say hello. Briefly,
you're
very welcome.
Briefly,
get on with it.
Caroline talked about the speed dating that went on during the coalition agreements. Surely speed was of the essence given the unstable state of the markets, firstly. Secondly, I don't think anyone in this room really believes that the Labour Party would not be going out for the best deal it could get in the same circumstances. On the general point of the party's popularity, I think David Cameron is probably very happy with this because it really gives him a chance to detoxify the Tory brand still further. I'm also surprised at how understanding people on the left seem to be of what the Liberal Democrats have done. I don't think they had much other choice, and very few people I know can see another choice.
The one in red there.
Yes, in light of the coalition, what do the panel think of David Cameron's attempt to open up the 1922 committee?
Min Campbell.
Yes, one doesn't want to intrude on private grief because the 1922 committee, or some of them at least, did it? Well, yes. But I think there was some suggestion that they hadn't had prior notice. They turned up, it was presented as a fait accompli, and the vote took place almost immediately. I mean, so far as the 1922 committee is concerned, that's a matter for the Conservative Party. We have a different form of parliamentary organisation for the Liberal Democrats. It's really up to the Conservatives how they decide to organise themselves. But one thing is certain, that the organisation of both parties domestically will have to change to reflect this new reality.
Shami Chakrabarti, let's come back to the question about whether the two are happier with each other than they are with their own parties.
Goodness me, I'm not in any of these parties. I could help the Home Secretary with one of her commissions. It could be a very short commission because the Human Rights Act is a British Bill of Rights. And if you don't think so, you just have to ask which bit of free speech, fair trials, personal privacy and no torture it is that you consider un-British.
But David, as you know, David Cameron's original view was an invitation for terrorists to come to Britain. That's what he called it.
My view of that, and you know, I've met the Prime Minister before he was the Prime Minister. My personal instinct about that was a statement made initially when he was very new as a leader of the Conservative Party. And I think that, you know, you could contrast that comment with the new Lord Chancellor, Conservative Lord Chancellor, Ken Clarke, who called that comment xenophobic legal nonsense. So there you go, you have coalitions within political parties as well as across them.
I just want to, Theresa May, what do you make of that remark by David Cameron, that the Human Rights Act was an invitation for terrorists to come to Britain? And if he thinks that, and presumably he still thinks that, how can he abandon it?
Well, it was a reflection of some of the cases that had been seen. I mean, we've been
talking
about issues earlier. What I thought was that it was right to say that we should replace it with a Bill of Rights, which actually balanced rights with responsibilities.
It does.
And that's the work that will be undertaken by the Commission. And it's absolutely clear in here in terms of our responsibilities for the European Convention on Human Rights.
I think Douglas made an important point, which is that well, I personally think that life is about coalitions, and the rest of us have to kind of make compromises in real life. And certainly even traditional big political parties are coalitions too. But Douglas makes an important point. If this is the new politics, where there's going to be more negotiation and coalition between parties, it's probably more important than ever that the parties, when they go out and fight an election, have a more distinct identity and programme, so that people know what it is that's being voted for and then compromise.
They're shouting at each other in Thirsk and Moulton today, so there's obviously still... Dispute is still alive in one constituency that hasn't yet voted. I can take 2 or 3 more points from the audience, then we'll move on. You, sir.
Yes, don't you think that the coalition government just shows how power-hungry politicians really are?
That's your view? Yes. Let's make some comments. And you, sir, here, because presumably... You voted, did you, in the election?
Yes.
You did. Were you disappointed with what happened?
Yes, I was very disappointed.
I won't ask you how you voted, unless you want to say, but...
well, I voted for UKIP because...
you weren't included in the coalition. And you said in the second...
see why you were disappointed.
Man in the second...
I'm just surprised at how often these phrases seem to be wheeled out and we seem to gobble them up. A strong and stable government, if I hear that term one more time, I mean, really, this is not a new politics that we've got. All it is a fudging of the edges, and we've got nothing new. What would be new is if Westminster actually reflected the general population. We have not got a voice in Westminster, and there is one reason why that is the case, and it's proportional representation. That's what we need, and that's what we want.
All this guff about repealing or replacing the Human Rights Act is typical Tory posturing. I mean, we're still bound by the European Convention on Human Rights, so it won't make a blind bit of difference. All that will happen is that any cases that are rejected in Britain will have to go to Strasbourg and argue it out there. Waste of time and money.
Judges. Yeah, the Tories would love that, wouldn't they?
OK. And the man in the 4th row from the back. You, sir. Yes.
Cameron and his crew talked about the need for a stable government, so that they could, and the test of whether there was a strong, stable government would be how the markets would react. If you look at how the markets have reacted over the last week since they've been in power, look at where sterling was a week ago versus where it is today. I think the markets have spoken, and they've told the coalition really what they think about them.
OK.
There are other reasons for that. It's the problem of Greece and the problem of the euro being under threat, and the unwillingness of Germany to help the bailout.
Has underappreciated the euro.
All right, we'll come to the economy in a moment. I want just to hear from members of the audience, just for a moment. The woman in red there, their views.
I'd just like to say that I think the two parties in power are very happy with power, if not with each other. That I think what we should also consider, though, is that in political parties there is lots of division, and part of being in the cabinet, being Prime Minister, is balancing all of that in the cabinet. And the third point I'd like to make is that personally I'm very pleased Vince Cable's in the cabinet.
Right. And you, sir, are you in favour of the coalition?
No.
Is anybody in favour of the coalition here? Oh, there are lots of hands up. Good, you just aren't speaking. Yes, sir.
I think Theresa May is the latest in a long line of people who've come out and said, you know, kind of the public have spoken, and this is what they want. They want this coalition. Labour lost the election, but so did the Tories. They didn't get a majority either. And if you... I very much doubt that a lot of people who voted Lib Dem actually wanted the Conservatives in power. So if you look at the share of the vote, actually what people are asking for is a centre-left alignment. And that isn't what we've got, which is why people are so disappointed.
I wanted to come back on that because I actually pointed out in my earlier remarks that no, of course, we didn't win that outright majority. But as Ming referred to in his comments earlier, there was an opportunity there after the election result for the Conservatives to form some form of minority government, or with some sort of confidence and supply support, as it's called, from the Liberal Democrats.
Life support.
And David Cameron and Nick Clegg were clear about this, that they talked about that. But then they said, actually, there's something much more interesting, more exciting that could be done in terms of British politics and in terms of the provision of government and in terms of the... Well,
Yeah.
What matters to this country is actually that we get to grips with the deficit, which is actually at the core of this programme.
All right,
that is a central concern for this country, and without a government that you could guarantee was actually going to be there and that we could have had elections after a few months, actually, I don't think we would have been able to do that.
Okay.
That's why this coalition government, and I'm sorry, sir, you may not like the phrase strong and stable, but that's what I believe this coalition government is.
All right, that's how we'll put the economy at the centre of this programme too, for a moment. Hold on. And judging by the number of hands that went up when I said who's in favour of the coalition, that you'll now become the silent majority or minority, I don't know, but silent anyway. But I don't think we need to go there. We'll have other chances to. But if you're watching this and want to comment and you Twitter, BBC Question Time is our site, as you probably know. Text us on 83981. CFAX, page 155, will tell you what others are saying. You know all this by heart. Watching digitally, push the red button. Email us. Here's our address. But please do it, because that's what we like to do, is to stir up a bit of argument. Let's go on to a question from Conrad Free, please.
Good evening. There is no money left. Will that be the epitaph for New Labour and Gordon Brown?
This was the message that Liam Byrne, the former Chief Secretary, left for his successor. Sorry, old thing, there's no money left, or words to that effect. Caroline Flint.
Well, I think it was a rather stupid joke, to be honest, and I'm sure Liam is ruined the day he did that as well. The fact is, we all know, and one of the big issues in the general election campaign was the deficit and how the different parties would tackle it. It is difficult. There have to be savings. We've said that, but what we had concerns about in the election was just how fast and how deep the Tories and now the Tory Liberal Democrat coalition would go, which might jeopardise our recovery, but also put a lot more people out of work. And after the Queen's speech next week and this emergency budget, when we'll know a little bit more, because I have to say again in the coalition document, I haven't literally studied it in a huge amount of detail, but one thing that stands out to me is that there are quite a lot of spending commitments that are in this document as well. And we need to know more about what this coalition will do. And I can assure you that in terms of protecting frontline services and preventing our economy going backwards, the Labour, as the official opposition, will be playing its part.
All right. Theresa May, do you think he meant it?
I suspect he did, and I have to say there's nothing funny about leaving this country in a situation of the worst budget deficit since the Second World War. And it is the central issue. It's a central issue to the coalition. We have agreement that we do need to take £6 billion, deal with the deficit, start dealing with it this year, that we do need to take £6 billion out of public spending this year. And we will be coming forward with that emergency budget. But what's absolutely clear is that it isn't just about actually getting the economy going again, isn't just about restraining public spending. It is also about ensuring that we can kickstart economic growth with things like, as George Osborne has been talking about this week, reducing corporation tax, trying to get companies going. I was at the launch of this document today when both George Osborne and Vince Cable were talking about the need to ensure that banks are lending again. Now, we had two different views as to how we might do that. It might be that we adopt both of those, or we'll look at which of those is going to work. But real practical ways of actually ensuring that we get this economy moving, because that is the key to being able to do what we want to do in this document, in this programme. But it's also the key to ensuring that we can deal with that deficit and pull this country round again and get it going in the right direction.
You, sir.
None of the parties have been completely truthful about these cuts that need to be made. The $6 billion that they're talking about taking out this year is a tiny, tiny fraction of total government spending. Some people saying it's less than 5%. So where is the money either going to be saved or where's it going to come from? You're now in government. You said before that you hadn't looked at the books. You have now. Maybe you could tell us.
Min Campbell?
Well,
you're also in government.
I haven't looked at the books, but I certainly concede that there are very difficult decisions to be taken. And there will have to be a balance between the expectation of growth, the necessity to raise taxes, and the extent to which it's necessary to cut public expenditure. And I don't want to sound like a Jonah, but I don't think, with very few exceptions, I think the possible exception of the National Health Service and international development, pretty well everything is going to be on the table. And there's going to be some pain. And you perhaps are right to say that the parties were not as specific in the general election campaign as they ought to have been or could have been, but there's absolutely no doubt this is going to be a very difficult time.
And do you blame...
And the balancing of these things.
Do you blame Labour for this?
Well, Gordon Brown's defence always is that this was a world-wide economic crisis.
You believe him?
He's right, 50%. The other 50% was caused by the fact that for the best part of 13 years, while he was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he allowed personal debt in this country to rise to £1.3 trillion. He allowed the economy to ride the wave of a housing boom. And what do you know about housing booms? Sooner or later, they come to an end. And when they come to an end, it's usually pretty painful. He's the man who said, we've abolished boom and bust, whereas the very policies he was carrying through or allowing to be carried through were doing the very opposite. So I'm afraid he can get some defence, if you like, for the international situation, and he can get some credit for the speed with which he moved to get the international community together on these matters, but he has to take responsibility for the state of the economy Britain had at the time, which, as a result of which the effects on Britain were exacerbated far beyond what was necessary.
You, sir.
I think that Liam's letter was in poor taste, and I'm sure that he will regret it for all the times he appears on the front of the Daily Telegraph. However, as a Labour Party member, I'm even more concerned about the millions of pounds that ministers appear to have signed through right in the last dying days of the last Labour government. And I do think that a thorough review of all public spending by the new Conservative and Liberal Democrat administration is called for. And as Caroline says, we'll see what they present at the budget.
Okay. Douglas Murray.
Yes, I agree with both members of the governing coalition on this one. The thing is, as Caroline said, it's a stupid joke. The problem is the joke's on us. It's us that's going to have to pick up the bill for this. Labour did spend in the most disgraceful way. And particularly in those last months. And I very much hope that political blame is levelled where it should be, and that the public demand that to be the case. Now, but we have to look at where we are. The gentleman in the audience is right. The political parties were not and have not been honest with the public. You quite rightly say the £6 billion cuts count for something like, I think it's 1% of the deficit that we have. When the emergency budget comes through, I very much hope the governing coalition rises. They're going to have to massively up the pressure to reduce that spending. It has to be at least something like 20% cuts in every government department would be the least that you needed to get on top of this. It is true. We were not told the real facts about this. We should demand them now.
All right. And thank you. Caroline Flint, do you want to answer the point that the Labour voter up there made, specifically about the amount of spending in the last year where Labour ministers had to write letters instructing the civil service? Lord Mandelson, 5 of them, because the civil servant said this wasn't legitimate spending and they couldn't pass it. What's your comment on that?
Well, first of all, civil servants quite rightly give advice to ministers, and ministers have to decide. And on each of the issues that where a ministerial direction, as it's called, has taken place, ministers, Labour ministers, I'm sure, when it comes out in terms of what they were, can justify them. And I'll give you one example, if I may: the car scrappage scheme. That was one of the schemes that I understand that civil servants actually said they didn't think it should go ahead. We've just heard an announcement today that car production is up, that one of the drivers to help make that happen was the car scrappage scheme. There are other areas of funding, for example, of regional development in Blackpool, led by a Tory council, in Leeds, led by a Tory Liberal Democrat council, where the government over the past year was keen to make sure that whilst we do recognise we have to make cuts, and Alistair Darling's plan was to halve the deficit over the 4 years, we also had to keep our economy going and investing in areas to make sure as we hit recovery, and we are in recovery, we can make the most of it.
So you have no shame about the civil service saying you were doing the wrong thing, which is what they said specifically.
No, what I'm saying is civil servants give advice, ministers make decisions, and they have to account for those decisions.
Yeah, but you don't have the right to let out every decision you make. There are specific decisions that you have to do.
Every ministerial direction is sent, I understand, to the National Audit Office. But the fact is that in avoiding us going from a recession into a depression, we also have to think about how we keep our economy going. And I have to say, banding around things about skeletons in the cupboard and everything else isn't helpful. Let them put up the examples, and Labour will actually defend them and justify why we made those choices.
All right. Do you want to come back on that point? And Shami, I'll come to you. Yes.
I think that Caroline's point is well made, is that they are justified and the ministers do decide. However, that doesn't mean that ministers should be reckless in what they're doing, and that's what appears to have been happening. And what I do want to see from the budget of the coalition government is that all these will be reviewed and then to make the final decision where the money's not been finally committed.
Shami Chakrabarti, briefly if you would on the economy, because we're coming to something else you may want to speak about.
At the risk of sounding repetitive, the Liam Byrne note was in incredibly bad taste. It's a schoolboy joke to him, perhaps, but schools, hospitals, jobs and houses are not a joke to the rest of us. Yes, inevitably, during an election campaign, politicians didn't want to be perhaps completely transparent about the level of the problem, but we're not stupid. We're just not stupid. And, you know, where exactly these savings are going to have to be made is way above my pay grade. But I just urge the government to make sure that those with the broadest shoulders take the greatest burden and that you protect the most vulnerable in our society.
I'd like to... I think we can fit in one more question from Claire Felon, please.
How can this country move forward when the new Minister for Equality is against gays adopting and transsexuals changing their gender?
How can our country move forward if the new Minister for Equality, which is the Home Secretary sitting on my right here, Theresa May, is against gay adoption and against transsexuals changing their agenda? I'll come to you, obviously, Theresa May. Shami Chakrabarti.
Well, I don't know that is the case.
Well,
the Home Secretary will no doubt speak for herself, but you know, I hope that's not the case. And
sorry, let's get this clear, Theresa May. Perhaps I should come to you first. You voted against the repeal of Section 28
some years ago,
in 1998 and in 2000, and you voted against gay couples adopting. Have you changed your view on those things?
If those votes were today, yes, I have changed my view, and I think I would take a different vote. But what I would say to you, in answer to the question, is that actually what will show the difference that the government is going to make is what we will do in government on this particular agenda of equalities. And we published a very full equalities contract, equalities manifesto, during the election campaign. That did include issues like addressing the very real issue of homophobic bullying in schools, for example. It did look commit that one of the things we would be doing is looking at ensuring that people who are claiming asylum from particular countries because they're at proven risk in relation to their sexuality, that we should be able to take that into account as an issue when looking at those claims for asylum from particular countries. So we have an agenda there on equalities which we will be putting forward on gay rights and on other issues as well.
What made you change your view, if you have, on gay couples adopting, teaching homosexuality in schools, transsexuals being allowed legally to change their gender? Have you changed your minds on all those things?
I tell you that I have changed. I'll give you an example of why I've changed my mind on I don't remember the last vote on the transgender issue.
Well, you didn't actually vote against it, but it's what called you didn't turn up 4 times running. Yes,
I wasn't there for the vote. There's a great deal of difference there, David. But on the gay adoption, yes, I have changed my mind, and I've changed my mind because I have been persuaded that actually, when you're looking at the future for a child, I think it is better for a child who is perhaps in an institutional environment, if they have the opportunity of being in a stable family environment, be that a heterosexual couple or a gay couple, then I think it's more important that that child is in that stable and loving environment. And I have genuinely changed my mind on that.
Caroline Flint.
Well, I'm pleased Theresa's changed her mind, and people, we should accept when people change their mind and welcome that. But can I just say that I'm also very proud that the Labour government since 1997 actually created a debate around these issues when they were very unpopular, where we didn't have support, I'm afraid, from Conservative frontbench people. And I think, actually, that's something I'm very proud of. One of many things I'm proud of, like the national minimum wage, which the Liberals and the Tories voted against.
Let's just go on about what you're proud about. You lost the election as you conceded. We don't want to hear a repetition. No, I won't, Caroline, actually. No, I won't, Caroline, because we don't want to hear this.
Other parties have changed their view because Labour started the debate.
The election's over. You, sir, in the front. Yes.
For the Minister for Equality, there's clearly a very clear divide in the pay between men and women in this country, and it's an ongoing situation which we've had for a very long time. If this was the case between a man of one skin colour and a man of another, it would be completely unacceptable and we'd be making national issue of it. What is your plan in the government to actually try and overcome this?
A bit far away from gay adoption, but since you've backed off that one, perhaps you just briefly answer that.
I didn't back off that one. I actually answered the question.
No, you backed off in the sense you said you no longer felt the way you did.
So
you changed your mind.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And of course, the situation in this country is that for several decades we've actually had legislation against discrimination in pay. We've had legislation on equal pay, which obviously hasn't been fully working. There's a variety of reasons why we still have that gender pay gap. And you can measure it in various ways. The normal measurement, usual measurement used, it's about 16% at the moment. Right. One of the things we looked at doing was making companies who were found guilty of discrimination be required to have a compulsory pay audit. The Liberal Democrats took a slightly different view in relation to pay audits. And what we have in this document is that we will be taking action in relation to equal pay. We're going to discuss which of those approaches is going to be the best one that is going to actually have results. But there are some other things that need to be done as well, too, because girls and young women need to get better careers advice, which is something we need to do.
Let's not go too far down this road, because the question was about something different. I don't know why I let it in, but there you are, the woman there.
Hello. Are you aware that there's a petition to have you sacked? And if that is, would you be able to address those people that are wanting to have you sacked because of the opinions that you have provided? But if you've changed your mind, then surely you should address us and let us know.
Who's the petition from?
It's on Facebook.
All right, you know about it. And why do you want her sacked? You've signed it.
Oh, no, I haven't signed it. I've just been aware of it. No, because if she's changed her mind, she's gone against what the petition is standing for, so maybe you should talk to these people and explain your situation.
She just has, so there we are. Douglas Murray, and then I come to you, Shami.
Yes, quickly, the Tory party, which has a terrible record of homophobia, of the kind of votes that the new Home Secretary voted along, including, by the way, the Section 28 was not about teaching homosexuality, it was, among other things, teaching young men how not to contract fatal diseases. It's always put as if it was some kind of advertisement for it. The Tory party has a terrible track record on this. However, they have noticed that under Labour, a lot of this changed. Labour did introduce, you've got to give them credit to it, very progressive, decent legislation on this. The Conservatives have realised the country has changed, and they have quite rightly realised they should change with it. The only thing I would add very quickly on that is that for all LGBT campaigners and others who sympathise with them, I think it's very important, whatever we think about this, that we also do not try to shut down debate. One of the problems that's happened recently is that gay rights campaigners and their friends and sympathisers have tried to sort of get out of the public sphere anything they don't agree with.
Thank you.
I'm against certain opinions, but I still think we have to allow them to be there in the mix.
Ning Campbell, we only have about 30 seconds left.
Very quick. Families come now in all shapes and sizes, and I think the celebration of the diversity of the people in the United Kingdom is absolutely central to the kind of country I want to live in, and I'm delighted that it's buttressed by the provisions of the European Convention on Human Rights.
And do you want one sentence, because you started, but I cut you off to hear from Theresa May?
Caroline Flint should be proud of her government's record in gay equality, and the new Home Secretary, delightful to be on a panel with 3 women for a change, by the way, should be proud of having changed her mind.
Okay. I'm afraid that ends question time this week. We're going to be in Gravesend next week. The panel includes Alistair Campbell, who I think is actually, though he appears everywhere else, has never been on Question Time before, which will be interesting.
Shame.
And he's got his old adversary, Piers Morgan, on the panel too. So I'm sure we'll all look forward to that.
We haven't got Adam Bolton.
We haven't got Adam Bolton as well. The following week we're in Brecon, so if you'd like to come either to Gravesend or Brecon, the usual number, 0871 626 99.